Thank you for coming
Of course. Happy
and
to be
doing this. Yeah.
here.
So tell me, well, tell all of us a little bit about you and the work that you do.
Sure. Okay, so I am a developmental psychologist. I'm a research psychologist, which means that I'm not a therapist. A lot of times when you hear the word psychologist, you automatically think a counselor or a therapist. But actually, I'm a statistician and a researcher, and I have bachelor's and master's degrees in marriage, family, and human development. And then I took a little break from school and worked at a child development center and worked for BYU Idaho, teaching for them. And I also had 4 kids in, in that space of time. And that was about 6 years ago. And then just last year, I came back to school and I'm in a PhD program in the same thing. It's in family and human development. And so I research healthy families and positive relationships. My main focus is on positive youth development, and I study things like empathy and pro-social behavior and hope and resilience in kids, especially kids that have been exposed to trauma and war. And I look a lot at how relationships and family environment, as well as like child temperament, kind of help kids overcome really bad circumstances. So that's basically what I do. I publish a lot, I write a lot, and I also teach students.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. And well, and as as a mom and raising your own kids now, especially in our current environment, I'm sure all of that, I mean, all the research that you have, I mean, you can see that so prevalent right now. So can you speak to a little bit of, the current environment? And I mean, we're all worried about our kids. Like even earlier today, um, we got on a Zoom call with my daughter and her kindergarten class.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the cutest thing. Like they were so excited to see each other. But then, of course, it was the domino effect of one of them was just sobbing. So then
Yes,
the parents are sobbing and the teacher's sobbing, and then all the other kids start crying.
right.
Yeah. So if you can
Yeah.
speak to, what they're all experiencing right now.
Sure. It's a super tough time. And not only is it hard, it's weird, right? So it's like, first of all, we're all going through this together, and we haven't really had a community shutdown like this. And so it's new and novel. And so what's happening for a lot of kids is that they're just having a lot of uncertainty. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that they're like angry, like on the outside, right? Like a lot of times when kids have a lot of acute stress like this, it's latent. And so they don't necessarily, you're not going to see them say, like, hey, mom, this coronavirus is really causing my anxiety to be high, right? Instead, you see acting out behaviors, you see kids pushing boundaries because they're trying to renegotiate where those boundaries are. You see kids really trying to get any kind of control that they can, which often means bad behavior, right? Because they're feeling out of control. And so on the inside, they don't know where those boundaries are. They're feeling really anxious, even though they can't label it. And so they're going to act out and try and look for control in any way they can. So, so while this is happening with your children, this is also happening in your own brain, right? There's a lot of uncertainty right now. So it's not just a child problem. Our teachers are going through this, our moms are going through this, dads are going through this, especially because we have a lot of economic uncertainty, as well as just like everyday basic schedule uncertainty. There's just lots of different layers, and I think everyone's just really struggling with not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or a month down the road.
Yeah. So what can parents do to help support their children, especially when they're feeling that uncertainty as well?
Sure. So a few things. So specifically for children, any kind of routine or schedule, give those kids some boundaries is going to be extremely helpful. So the thing is, I feel like I hear that said a lot, and I know it's true as a developmentalist, but oftentimes we say statements like that, but then don't talk about what it actually looks like. So right now on Facebook, I've noticed in a lot of other moms groups and social media pages, there's lots of schedules flying around, right? And I love that our homeschooling moms are trying really hard to help those of us who are like newly homeschooling. And I just love that, appreciate that support from women. But the thing is, a lot of us, we're not trained to be teachers, and we're not used to having a school type schedule. And so a lot of those schedules that are out there are not super helpful. Like they can be. I think that there are a lot of good ideas that are floating around, but try not um, to compare what's happening in your home right now to all these schedules on Facebook. So what I would recommend, rather than just trying to adopt an exact like minute by minute schedule for your days, is just to try and like come up with some kind of rhythm or some kind of structured events that need to happen in your day. So for some people that might look like a checklist of things your kids need to get done with no time constraints before they can log on to any kind of screen time. So that's just going to give their brain some boundaries, right? And that also gives your brain some boundaries. Another thing I would recommend is if you do want to have like a schedule of like art time, music time, sensory time, which is really great for kids, then I would still recommend not putting like a minute by minute schedule on that. But knowing the order of what's going to happen next in a child's day is going to really help them a lot. So with all these things too, I'm sure you've mentioned this before, there is a lot of trial and error involved. So if you want to try that Facebook, the color coded schedule that I'm seeing float around, then great, like try it. Invest in it for a day or two, see how it goes. But if it's just not working and there's a good chance that it won't, then scrap it and try something different, or just try like, yeah, try and pare down your expectations. So just have that little checklist, or have an order of how you want things to go, or even just pick like solid meal times, so that even if your child isn't quite sure what's going to be happening in the morning or the afternoon, they know like, hey, breakfast is at 8, lunch is at 12, dinner is going to be at 5:30. Give them some kind of scaffolding in their brain to kind of latch onto, and that's going to help you and them.
Well, and I love what you said about that trial and error, because that is something that we talk a lot about in the group is when we're stuck in that mindset of like there's one right answer, then we create so much stress and pressure for ourselves. And then when it doesn't go according to plan, then we're, hitting the ceiling,
Sure.
losing our temper with them as well. So I love that you
Right.
said that.
Yeah, absolutely. So expectations are something that I would absolutely touch on. So what we do show in a lot of research on women in general is that if you picture this line of where your expectations are, and then this line of where you actually are performing, like your reality. So if this is your expectations and then this is your reality, the wider this gap gets, the more mental health and depression that we see in
Mhm.
women. So you want to try and close this gap. So there's two ways you can close the gap, right? You can either raise your performance or you can lower your expectations. So right now is a very hard time in our country to raise your performance, right? I think most of us are surviving. Um, and so that means it's a great time to lower those expectations as best as you can. So pick a couple things maybe that are like musts, right? Like we must be washing our hands, or I must be feeding my children, right? These basics, and then try to let some of those other things go if you can at all, and be cognizant of the fact that lowering those expectations of yourself, of your house, of your partner if you have one, of your children, that might go a long way for your mental health and for your stress level.
And at least like with my experience, when I think about lowering expectations, it's almost like there's this like I'm holding on to them so tight because I think it's going to serve my kids in some way. Like if I let those expectations go, my kids may never get their schoolwork done. Or if I let those, and I'm always like, there's like this fear that these thought patterns of like this fear of like my kids are going to get behind, they'll never get caught up. Can you speak to that just a little bit as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as a resilience researcher and someone who's studied a lot of child development, um, your kids are going to be fine. And kids are so resilient. Their brains are so plastic still, which means that they're moldable and malleable. Anytime you talk about children who are under the age of 18, their brain development is so rapid at this point, even still by 18, that your kids are going to catch up. There's lots and lots of research on this that in from preschoolers on that. So say there's a great example of like people are constantly trying to compare children who went to preschool and children who didn't, and whether or not those kids, or who's going to do better in kindergarten. And what the research shows is that there are short-term gains for children who went to preschool, but not long-term gains. So what that means is that when children enter kindergarten, whether they had preschool or not, by the end of kindergarten, everyone is on the same playing field, even though the kids that had preschool are a little bit more ahead at the start. So it just shows kids catch up. And when kids are in a developmental stage, they're perfectly capable of speeding up their development a little bit if they need to. So I was just talking actually to some colleagues, some developmental researchers, and we were talking about how we're doing this with our kids. And one of my very prolific researchers, she told me, Ashley, if it's 8 hours or it's 8 weeks of TV, it's 8 weeks of TV. Just know that your children are going to be just fine going to school back in the fall in the next grade if they missed the last like 8 to 12 weeks of this grade, because they will catch up. Also keep in mind that we're all in this boat together, and so it's not like it's just your child, right, that struggled or that missed this. We're all doing this, and teachers are going to be aware that things are going to have to kids are going to have to get caught up in the fall a little bit, but they're going to catch up fast. Like all the research we do on resilience, it just shows how remarkable it is that kids can catch up quick developmentally in academic realms, at least. So I know you and I had discussed this a little bit before. The best thing you can do for your children right now is nurture a quality relationship, because what really hurts kids, what is really traumatic for kids, is a super stressed out, chaotic home environment, which is often perpetuated by very stressed out, chaotic parents, which I am like the first one to tell you that I am stressed out, right? This is a very hard and weird time. But if you can facilitate a warm relationship through this time with your kids and try and create an environment of peace, at least as much as you can, that's going to go such a long way for your kids, way more than trying to get them to do some kind of multiplication table or read the next level of book. Just try really hard to cultivate an environment of peace and love and acceptance. We're all lowering our expectations, remember. And that's going to just really, really help now and in the future, because what we show for kids is that the number one thing that helps them to be resilient and bounce back is a warm, caring, and supporting relationship with a loving adult. So you don't want to let that slide in the name of times tables. It's going to go a lot farther if you keep that intact.
Yeah, well, and I love that thought, because like at least for my kids, if that connection is not there, then we are all functioning at a more stressful, right, like, and
Sure.
sometimes at least for us, like that connection happens in just a quick moment of like turning music on and dancing in the kitchen, and it just changes the energy level in the home. Or like I was sitting there, helping my daughter with her little packet, and she was starting to get a little stressed out, and I just like reached over and like held her hand on the table, and she like had an itch and like itched it, and then she put her hand like back under mine. And I was
Oh,
like,
sweet.
oh, like it's so cute to see how that connection. And then she was able to work through that next page, and we didn't get through all of it, and we just let it be for today. And maybe forever. We
Yeah,
do
that's fine.
like every day is like a whole new, I feel like, adventure.
Yeah.
um and that's where, like, so I love that point of like really creating that connection and having that more peaceful environment. And for the mom, like, that's a huge thing of like feeling that for myself, because that also helps
Mhm.
keep my stress levels down as well.
Sure, absolutely. There's some great research. I don't know if you've read anything by John Gottman too. He talks about,
Mhm.
he's a marriage and divorce researcher, but he also does some parenting work. And he talks about the magic 5-to-1 ratio, where it really helps you have a solid relationship with your child if you have 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction.
Mhm.
So again, at this really stressful time, a lot of us are trying to get our kids to do things that we haven't usually had to get them to do, right? And also we're all a little bit anxious or a lot anxious. And so it's really hard maybe to reduce maybe some of that negative interaction, that one, but it's always easier to up your positive, right? So even if you're having a little bit more negative, or you're maintaining the negative that you usually do, up that positive as much as you possibly can so that you can maintain that 5-to-1 ratio. And something I actually do is I actually count and I try and tally
That's
in my
awesome.
mind when I've had a positive interaction with my kids, and that can be physical touch. We need a lot of physical touch right now. We're not touching each other because the virus, but human bodies need touch so badly. So up your touch if you can. But I try and keep a tally of that with my kids, and I try and maintain that 5 to 1 as best that I can, especially when my one is going to more like 2 or 3 or 4, right? Because then my positive needs to go to like 20 or 25 or 30, right?
Well, and I think that's a good point, even for ourselves too, of like, every time we're getting on social media, we should have five, positive
Yeah,
interactions, to
right.
help counterbalance like whatever it is that we're experiencing for ourselves. So I love that 5 to 1 ratio. That's fantastic. So what about parents? And I've caught myself. I don't typically do this, but I've caught myself wanting to do it. Of like, if you don't get this done, then I'm not. I'm going to take this away, or because it's again like going back to those expectations. You are
Mhm.
trying to get your kid to do things that they may not necessarily want to do or are used to you asking you. So what about using those things as like consequences of like taking away the fun stuff?
Yeah, so I think that's really hard. That's a hard thing to do because you do want your children, like you do want to have some level of accountability. Um, but also, like, I think just keeping in mind some of these other things we've been talking about, that kids are resilient. And so it's all right to maybe let a few things slide here or there. And then also just like keep some balance. Try and remember that instead of like maybe hitting a certain benchmark, maybe it's better to say, hey, we're shooting for a range here. Like instead of saying, we really need to get 5 of these interactive tutorials done. Instead, if you say like this week, we should really get to like 10 of these. And then each day, let there be some balance and some back and forth, so that you're not just like harping on your child every day about this certain thing and killing the relationship like we've talked about. So yeah, I think that balance is really the name of the game, trying to find that happy medium between, yeah, you want some routine, you want some accountability, but also letting some things slide. I think it's a good rule. Yeah, to that 5 to 1 thing can be really helpful. And if all of a sudden you're at 20 negatives, it's time to reassess, like, is how essential is this? And do I need to slide on this scale, so that I'm kind of maintaining a positive relationship with my child? Then that's going to help, every day going forward, you getting them to do the things that you need them to do. But I know that's hard. It's trial and error, like you keep saying, and you have to just kind of each day figure out where you're at in that range and try and set an appropriate range,
Yeah.
for you and your child.
Yeah, I really like that idea of like having a range to go through. I I find with my kids, especially my older one who's in third grade, that I like when he finishes because it's almost like a feeling of accomplishment for me.
Sure.
And so sometimes, going back to those expectations, like I'm waiting for him to finish so I can check that off my list of like I was a
Mhm.
good mom today. And,
Right.
and that's a lot of pressure to put on a kid. Like,
It is. It's a ton. And we see this in sport a lot too, right? Where kids or parents are more interested in their child winning than in their child learning about the purpose of sport, which is like teamwork and working out and exercise. And so I think that that can be applied here as well, as like, what is your purpose here really? And revisit, yeah, is this worksheet, yeah, really the end all be all of this, or is it that we're just going to get through this period, we're going to have a happy home, we're going to hopefully make some educational gains. But if not, then you know what? We're alive. We have maybe held down jobs, which is extremely important. We don't have the virus. We're not spreading it. So I think that, yeah, revisiting the purpose of why we're doing all of these things in our community at large, and then what that looks like for you in your home, is important to, yeah, reassess those expectations for your kids.
yeah, yeah, I really love that. Um, and you kind of touched on creating that more peaceful environment as well, like within the home. You mentioned creating that connection to help with that. Do you have any other things that you recommend doing as a family or as an individual, as a mom, that you might be able to touch on?
Sure. So the routine is going to help, like we talked about, having some set boundaries. And then I was actually recently in a session with a counselor at a Women in Academia conference, and she said that anytime she talks about home environment, she always recommends for the mother at least exercise. I'm sure you've talked about this, right? Exercise and some kind of mindfulness activity. At least she recommends like at least 10 minutes twice a day to kind of get back in touch with yourself and getting yourself in a good place so that you can come to your kids from a place of positivity instead of place of total crisis. So yeah, the routine is going to help. Something else that I've seen really help is having a place of peace in your home. So if you just keep your bedroom shut and locked and therefore clean, right? Then if you have an escape place that you can go to and just like and recenter, right? Where you can have a reset in a happy environment, and then you can go back out and face the chaos again is a good idea. And then with screen time too, some people find that screen time is just essential to survival right now, and their kids are doing a lot of screen time, and I think we should give grace for that. I've also seen that a lot of parents are finding that more screen time is actually not helping. So I think in that case, maybe just figuring out this your trial and error again, if you need to cut back on that and how you can buffer it. Something else that can really help is having like a solid family meal time, and maybe it's just one a day, but sometime when you can have 20 minutes of uninterrupted time with your family, maybe at dinner, where there is no technology present and you're just going to connect as a family. That has research wise has shown to be incredibly helpful for a home environment to at least have one meal, 20 minutes, no screens. So those are a few little things.
Yeah, I love that. And I think about, having that place of peace. And oftentimes I put that during their screen time as well. Like that's like usually when I will remove myself. And I even put that, on our schedule, our routine of like, this is mom's alone time. This is beneficial for all of us. Like that's when
Right.
I'm able to like recenter a little bit.
Yes,
And I
step
love what
away
you
and
mentioned,
recharge.
like exercise. Like that was one thing I realized last night when I was kind of thinking like, they had just changed, to May 1 for schools of, when they're out. And I really, yeah, I have speculations about whether that's going to be moved again.
Yeah, me too.
But when I was like assessing, my own mental health, that was one thing that came up for me of like, oh, I've forgotten to move my body a little bit. Like I need
Yes.
to get back out and, just go for a walk again by myself, have that place of peace where I can recenter and focus
Yes.
on me a little bit so I can show up in the way I want to for my kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our bodies were designed to live outside, and yet we spend the entirety of our lives inside and sitting. So as much as you can get up and move and be in an outside environment, that's going to just help loads.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. Well, do you have anything else that's on your mind that you want to share with us?
No, just keep on keeping on. We're all in this together. Yeah, get outside as much as you possibly can. I know a lot of people are trying to take walks at very obscure times so that it's, we're social
You're
distancing
right.
and getting outside. So yeah, I think that's like my number one tip is try and get outside as much as you can. Touch your kids. I know like not all of us are huggers, but it's really important. A lot of kids are huggers. So if you can have some physical contact with your child or your partner, I think that's a great idea. And then just extend some grace to yourself and to everyone else. We're all doing this a little bit differently. We're all trying to keep our jobs. And that's going to look different for everyone. So just best of luck figuring out what works for you, and know that all of us are dealing with this together, and it's very hard.
Yeah, I thank you. I really appreciate that. And, going back to what you said at the beginning, like, it's just weird. And we're all feeling weird together and giving ourselves that, that allowance and that permission to just be okay with that. So it's a good
Yeah,
reminder.
absolutely. Our kids will be fine. Just know our kids will be okay. It'll be all right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We needed that assurance tonight for sure.
Of
Well, thank
course, of course.
you.